Nobody knew who was saving them. And that was exactly how she wanted it. The wind rolled across the Afghan mountains like a living thing, carrying dust through the narrow valleys and rattling loose gravel along the ridge lines above Firebase Archer. It was 4:17 in the morning when Commander Mason Reed adjusted the night vision scope mounted to his rifle and scanned the dark terrain stretching nearly 2 miles ahead of Team Alpha's position. The mountains looked empty. Silent. But after 14 years as a Navy SEAL, Mason had learned silence in combat zones usually meant someone was waiting. Movement. 11 o'clock ridge, whispered Logan Pierce over comms. Mason shifted his scope immediately. A figure appeared briefly near a cluster of broken rocks high above the canyon trail. Then another shape moved behind it. Too organized to be shepherds. Too patient to be amateurs. Mason lowered himself behind a boulder as cold air cut through his tactical gloves. "Hold position," he said calmly. "Nobody fires unless I call it." Below them, the canyon floor disappeared into darkness nearly 800 feet down. Team Alpha had been moving through the region for 3 straight nights after intelligence reports suggested insurgents were setting up ambush points along U.S. supply routes. Every drone sweep had come back clean. Every thermal scan showed empty rock formations. But twice now, enemy scouts had somehow appeared within firing range before vanishing again into the terrain like ghosts. The men were tense. Mason could hear it in their breathing over comms. Could feel it in the way they stopped joking hours ago. Somewhere beyond those ridges, somebody was watching them. Then the radio cracked softly. "Target confirmed," Logan whispered. "Possible sniper." Mason focused harder through the scope. Nearly 1,400 yards ahead, a faint silhouette shifted beside a jagged rock shelf overlooking the canyon. The figure was prone. Still. Patient. Mason's instincts tightened instantly. The angle was perfect for an overwatch position. "Everyone stay low," Mason ordered. "Do not expose yourselves." A gust of wind swept across the ridge. Dust spiraled through the air. Then suddenly, Logan froze. "He's aiming," he breathed. Mason saw it too. The silhouette adjusted slightly. The faint reflection of optics caught the moonlight for half a second. Directly aimed toward Team Alpha's position. Every muscle in Mason's body locked tight. Time slowed. He opened his mouth to order immediate cover when something unexpected happened. The silhouette jerked once and disappeared backward behind the rocks. Silence returned instantly. No muzzle flash. No echo. No visible impact. Just, gone. Mason blinked hard through the optic. "What the hell?" Logan muttered. Another SEAL beside him adjusted thermal imaging. Target disappeared. Mason's pulse quickened. "Did anyone fire?" "Negative. No shots. Nobody fired." Mason stared at the ridge. Then another voice came through comms. "Commander, second movement. Left side." Mason swung the optic again. Another armed figure appeared farther uphill, moving quickly between rocks as if trying to reposition. Before Mason could react, the second silhouette collapsed mid-step and rolled out of view down the incline. Again, no sound. No visible shooter. Just the wind moving through the canyon. Team Alpha went completely silent. Even the radio chatter stopped. Mason slowly lowered the rifle. "Talk to me," he said. "Anybody have visual on shooter?" "Negative. No thermal source. No flash signature." Logan exhaled sharply. "Sir, someone else is out there." Mason looked back toward the ridge line. The mountains stretched for miles in every direction under pale moonlight. Empty terrain. Empty sky. Yet 2 armed scouts had just been neutralized with impossible precision while an entire SEAL reconnaissance team failed to identify the shooter. His stomach tightened. He had seen elite snipers before. CIA contractors. Delta operators. Foreign special forces. But nobody fired like that without leaving traces behind. "Drone feed online in 30 seconds, said their tech operator from the rear position. Mason immediately keyed comms. "Launch thermal sweep. Full canyon scan. I want every inch searched." Minutes later, a compact surveillance drone lifted silently into the freezing air and disappeared above the ridges. Mason watched the tablet feed as infrared imaging painted the mountains in shifting shades of black and white. Rock formations glowed faintly from retained heat. Sparse brush moved in the wind. Team Alpha scanned every possible firing position within 2 square miles. Nothing. No movement. No thermal signature. No shooter. Logan shook his head slowly. "That's impossible." Mason agreed. Even the best snipers left heat traces eventually. Body signatures. Disturbed terrain. Something. But whoever had taken those shots was already gone. Or worse, had never been where they thought at all. The canyon suddenly felt larger around them. Darker. More unpredictable. "Commander," another SEAL whispered uneasily, "what if the rumors are true?" Mason didn't answer immediately. Everyone stationed near Firebase Archer had heard the stories by now. Patrols walking into ambushes only for enemy fighters to suddenly vanish before contact. Convoys surviving attacks because hostile scouts somehow dropped before giving signals. Men saved by shots nobody heard. Nobody believed the rumors officially. Operators mocked ghost stories. But standing in those freezing mountains at nearly 5,000 feet elevation, Mason Reed felt something unfamiliar settle into his chest. Uncertainty. Then the radio buzzed again. Calm. Female. Almost emotionless. "Team Alpha, this is Overwatch 7. Recommend immediate relocation. You've been compromised for the last 6 minutes." Mason's eyes narrowed instantly. "Identify yourself." Silence answered him. Then the transmission ended. Logan looked over slowly. "Sir, who the hell was that?" Mason stared toward the endless ridges disappearing into darkness. Somewhere out there, hidden among miles of rock and shadow, someone had been watching them the entire time. And whoever she was, she clearly knew exactly where they stood. The helicopter touched down just after sunrise, its rotors throwing dust across the outer perimeter of Firebase Archer as exhausted operators climbed from the cabin one by one. Commander Mason Reed stepped onto the gravel with stiff legs and a mind that had not stopped replaying the events from the canyon. Around him, the base was already waking up. Mechanics rolled fuel carts between armored vehicles. Marines carried supply crates toward the motor pool. Somewhere near the communications tent, country music played faintly through static before someone shut it off with a curse. Everything looked normal. That was the problem. Mason removed his headset and handed it to a crew chief without saying a word. Logan Pierce caught up beside him, lowering his rifle. "You still thinking about the transmission?" Mason glanced toward the mountains beyond the perimeter walls. Even from here, the ridges looked endless. Empty. "I am thinking about the fact somebody tracked our exact position in real time without showing up on thermal or satellite." Logan adjusted the strap on his vest uneasily. "Maybe CIA." Mason shook his head once. "CIA leaves fingerprints everywhere." They entered the command building together, passing operators drinking burnt coffee around folding tables covered in maps and drone footage printouts. Conversations filled the room until Team Alpha walked in. Then everything quieted for a second. The men looked at Mason expectantly. Word had already spread. Another patrol. Another impossible save. Another invisible shooter. "Did you see the ghost?" someone finally asked from the back. Mason ignored the question and walked toward the operations board mounted against the far wall. Drone images from the canyon were already displayed across multiple monitors. Satellite overlays. Elevation grids. Heat signatures. Every inch of terrain from last night had been scanned repeatedly. Yet the firing position remained unidentified. Still nothing? Mason asked. A young intelligence officer looked up from his station nervously. No thermal traces, sir. No shell casings. No disturbed terrain patterns. Whoever fired those shots either relocated immediately or, he hesitated. Or what? Mason asked. The officer swallowed. Or they were never there in the first place. Logan let out a quiet laugh under his breath. That makes no sense. None of this makes sense, Mason replied. He stared at the frozen drone image on the main monitor. Jagged cliffs. Narrow canyons. Wind-blown rock shelves. Somewhere inside that landscape, an unknown shooter had neutralized 2 hostile scouts before Team Alpha even recognized the threat. Mason had spent years studying long-range combat tactics. He knew what elite marksmanship looked like. But those shots had felt different. Cleaner. Faster. Like the shooter already knew where every target would move before they moved there. Commander Reed, a voice said quietly nearby. Mason turned slightly. A woman stood near the side operations table holding a stack of printed satellite maps against her chest. Blonde hair tied back low. Thin-framed tactical glasses. Early 30s maybe. Her gray field jacket looked slightly oversized against her smaller frame. Mason recognized her vaguely from previous briefings. Intelligence Division. Quiet type. What is it? He asked. Updated terrain overlays from Sector Echo and Sector 12, she said calmly. There are inconsistencies in the drone sweeps from last night. Mason accepted the papers automatically. Name. Evelyn Carter. Her voice remained steady. Almost detached. Mason scanned the overlays while she spoke. The wind shifted around 0300 hours. Thermal distortion along the eastern ridges may have masked elevated positions. Logan glanced at her with mild skepticism. You are saying somebody hid from military thermal drones because of wind? Evelyn adjusted the map slightly. I am saying mountain terrain creates blind channels. Especially above 6,000 feet. Logan exchanged a quick look with another operator nearby. One of them smirked faintly. You sound pretty confident for someone sitting behind monitors all day. Evelyn did not react. Confidence has nothing to do with it. Mason finally looked up from the maps. She met his eyes directly for half a second before calmly pointing toward a narrow ridge line marked in red ink. Your team entered the canyon from the wrong angle, she said. The shooter compensated for crosswinds coming west at approximately 18 miles per hour. Logan frowned. You calculated that already? It is basic trajectory adjustment. The room fell quiet for a moment. Not because of what she said. Because of how casually she said it. Most intelligence officers talked like analysts reading reports. Evelyn Carter spoke like someone who had actually felt mountain wind against a rifle scope. Mason noticed it immediately. So did Logan. Where did you learn long-range corrections? Logan asked. Evelyn's expression never changed. Research. Before either man could respond, another operator walked past carrying coffee cups. Good luck finding your ghost sniper, Commander, he joked toward Mason. At this point half the base thinks she is a myth. A few people laughed softly around the room. Evelyn lowered her eyes back to the maps without comment. Mason studied her briefly. Something about her felt strangely disconnected from the rest of the base. Everyone else carried tension openly after missions. Fatigue. Ego. Adrenaline. But Evelyn Carter stood perfectly still amid the noise and movement around her like none of it touched her at all. Then Mason noticed something else. Her hands. Faint scars lined the knuckles beneath the fluorescent lighting. Not office scars. Pressure scars. Repeated friction marks. The kind operators developed after years handling rough equipment in cold environments. Evelyn calmly collected the remaining maps. "You should avoid Sector 12 tonight," she said quietly. Mason looked up sharply. "Why?" "Because if I can predict where your team will move next," she replied, "someone else already has." Then she turned and walked toward the rear operations office before either man could stop her. Logan watched her disappear behind the doorway. "Weird," he muttered. Mason kept staring after her silently. Outside, beyond the concrete walls of Firebase Archer, the Afghan mountains stood motionless beneath the morning sun. Vast. Empty. Watching. And somewhere hidden inside those ridges, the unseen marksman who saved Team Alpha was still out there. Waiting. By nightfall, the entire base was talking about the woman on the radio. Nobody knew her name. Nobody knew where the transmission came from. But every operator at Firebase Archer remembered the voice. Calm. Precise. Like she already knew exactly how the mission would end before the first shot was ever fired. Commander Mason Reed stood alone inside the observation tower overlooking the southern perimeter, watching floodlights stretch across the desert floor below. The wind had picked up again after sunset, dragging cold dust across the barriers and rattling loose sheets of metal somewhere near the maintenance hangar. He had not slept in nearly 20 hours. Not because of the mission. Because his instincts kept telling him something about this entire situation was wrong. Team Alpha had survived thanks to a shooter nobody could identify. Thermal drones found nothing. Satellite imaging found nothing. And now operators across the base were building ghost stories around a voice over military comms. Mason hated ghost stories. Ghost stories made soldiers careless. "You are doing it again," Logan Pierce said as he climbed the tower steps carrying 2 paper coffee cups. Mason glanced over. "Doing what?" Logan handed him a cup. "Looking at those mountains like they owe you answers." Mason accepted the coffee silently. Far beyond the perimeter walls, the Afghan ridges stretched endlessly beneath moonlight. Dark silhouettes against darker sky. Logan leaned against the railing beside him. "Word is spreading fast," he said. "The younger guys are calling her Phantom." Mason took a slow sip. "That is exactly what I did not want." "You cannot stop it now." Logan shrugged slightly. 3 patrol teams claim somebody saved them over the past month. Mason looked at him sharply. "What?" Logan nodded. "I checked after this morning. Team Echo lost radio contact 2 weeks ago near Black Ridge. They said enemy scouts disappeared before engagement. Same thing happened with a convoy outside Kandar Pass." Mason frowned. "Nobody filed official reports. Because nobody wants to sound crazy." Logan lowered his voice slightly. "Some of the Marines think there is a contractor team operating off-book out here." Mason considered that possibility again. Secret operations were common enough. But something still did not fit. Contractors made mistakes. Ego alone guaranteed it. They bragged. They drank too much. They left traces. Whoever this shooter was operated with complete invisibility. No recognition. No contact. No mistakes. "You know what bothers me most?" Mason finally asked. Logan looked over. "The voice?" Mason shook his head slowly. "No panic." He stared back toward the mountains. "People under pressure sound different. Breathing changes. Speech changes. But whoever transmitted that warning sounded completely calm." Logan smirked faintly. "Maybe she knew there was no danger." Mason looked at him. "Or maybe she already handled it before we even realized it existed." The words settled heavily between them. Down below, headlights moved through the base motor pool while generators hummed steadily in the distance. Then Mason noticed movement near the communications building across the yard. A woman stepped outside carrying a cardboard box filled with radio equipment. Blonde hair tied back. Gray field jacket. Evelyn Carter. Logan followed Mason's gaze and immediately grinned. "Your analyst friend." Mason ignored the comment. Evelyn crossed the yard quietly while several Marines walked past her without a second glance. She blended into the base so naturally people barely seemed to register her presence at all. Yet now that Mason had noticed her, he kept noticing strange details. The way she scanned rooftops automatically while walking. The way she always positioned herself near exits during briefings. The way her eyes tracked terrain maps faster than trained recon specialists. Logan watched her disappear into another building. "You think she is connected somehow?" Mason answered carefully. "I think she notices things other people miss." Logan chuckled softly. "That woman notices things because she lives behind satellite screens." Mason said nothing. But he remembered the scars on her hands. The precision in her voice when discussing wind drift. The way she predicted firing angles without hesitation. Analysts studied data. Operators remembered experience. There was a difference. Suddenly the radio clipped to Mason's vest crackled alive. "Commander Reed, report to operations immediately." Mason and Logan exchanged looks before descending the tower stairs two at a time. Inside the command building, tension filled the room instantly. Multiple officers stood around the central operations table while drone feeds streamed across wall monitors. A reconnaissance patrol near Sector 12 had encountered movement less than an hour earlier. 3 unidentified hostiles were observed repositioning above the valley approach, an operations officer explained quickly. Before Team Delta engaged, all 3 targets disappeared. Mason folded his arms. Disappeared how? The officer hesitated. They dropped simultaneously. Silence spread through the room. One Marine muttered quietly under his breath. "No way." Another operator pointed toward the screen. "Zoom in." Satellite footage enlarged across the monitor. Grainy infrared imaging revealed rocky terrain lit in pale white heat signatures. Mason narrowed his eyes. High above the valley, almost hidden beside a jagged cliff edge, sat a faint shape no larger than a shadow. Human. Motionless. Watching. "There," Logan whispered. The room leaned closer. The image sharpened slightly for half a second before static interference distorted the feed. Then the shape vanished completely. Gone. Several operators began talking over each other immediately. "Freeze that frame. Enhance thermal. Track the ridge line." Mason stared silently at the empty screen afterward. His pulse had quickened for reasons he did not entirely understand. Because for the first time, there was proof. Not clear proof. Not enough to identify anyone. But enough to confirm one thing. Somebody really was out there. And somehow they were staying one step ahead of an entire military base. Then quietly from the rear of the room came a familiar voice. "You are searching the wrong ridge." Everyone turned. Evelyn Carter stood near the doorway holding another stack of terrain reports against her chest. Calm as ever. Unbothered by the sudden attention. One Marine frowned. "Excuse me." Evelyn walked slowly toward the operations screen. "The shooter never fires from elevated positions twice," she said softly. "That would make prediction easier." The room went silent again. Mason studied her carefully. "How would you know that?" Evelyn looked at the distorted thermal image for a long moment before answering. "Because whoever is out there," she paused slightly. "They already know how all of you think." The next patrol entered the mountains 40 minutes before dawn, and this time every man in Team Delta felt it before they even crossed the first ridge. The silence out there no longer felt natural. It felt watched. Sergeant Tyler Grant adjusted the strap on his rifle as loose gravel shifted beneath his boots along the narrow canyon path. Cold wind pushed through the rocks in uneven bursts, carrying the faint smell of dust and diesel from villages miles away. Ahead of him, 2 Marines moved carefully between boulders while a drone buzzed high overhead, feeding live thermal imaging back to Firebase Archer. "Still clear," came the voice from drone command over comms. Tyler glanced up toward the dark ridges towering nearly 1,000 feet above them. "That is what they said last time," he muttered quietly. Nobody laughed. Ever since Commander Mason Reed briefed them on the unidentified Overwatch shooter, the atmosphere around the base had changed. Operators stopped mocking the rumors. Patrol teams double-checked ridgelines longer than usual. Some Marines even started leaving empty seats around mess hall tables, joking that the ghost might already be sitting there listening. But Tyler did not believe in ghosts. He believed in patterns. And the pattern was simple. Every patrol that should have walked into danger somehow survived because somebody out there intervened first. "Movement east side," whispered Corporal Dean Mitchell suddenly. Everyone froze instantly. Tyler dropped behind a rock and raised binoculars toward the upper ridgeline. For a brief moment, he saw it. 3 silhouettes shifting near a broken cliff edge nearly 1,600 yards away. Watching the patrol route below. "Targets confirmed," Tyler whispered into comms. 3 individuals. High ridge overlooking Canyon Pass. "Drone is adjusting now," command replied. Tyler steadied his breathing. The figures remained partially hidden among the rocks, barely moving at all. Professional positioning. Whoever they were, they knew exactly where Team Delta would pass through the valley choke point. "Permission to engage?" Dean asked quietly. Tyler hesitated. Something about the positioning bothered him. Too exposed. Too visible. Almost like bait. Then suddenly one of the silhouettes tilted sideways and disappeared from view. Tyler frowned. What was that? Before anyone answered, the second figure collapsed backward behind the ridge line. The third attempted to move but vanished almost instantly as well. Silence filled the canyon. No muzzle flash. No rifle crack. Nothing. Dean slowly lowered his weapon. "No way," he whispered. Tyler grabbed the radio immediately. "Command, did our drone engage?" "Negative," came the confused response. "No aerial assets fired." Team Delta stared toward the ridge in disbelief. The drone camera zoomed rapidly across the terrain feed from above, searching for any sign of the shooter. Heat signatures flickered along the rocks. Wind distortion rolled through the canyon walls. But the firing position remained invisible again. "This is impossible," one Marine muttered. Tyler did not answer. His eyes remained locked on the ridgeline. Then movement caught his attention farther west. High above the canyon floor, nearly hidden against the mountainside, stood the faint outline of a person beside a narrow rock shelf. Motionless. Watching. Tyler adjusted the binocular focus sharply. The figure appeared smaller than expected. Slim build. Long rifle silhouette. The person remained visible for barely 2 seconds before stepping backward behind the ridge and disappearing completely into shadow. "I saw somebody," Tyler said quickly into comms. "West Ridge. Approximately 1,800 yards. Can you confirm identity?" command asked immediately. Tyler kept scanning the terrain. Nothing remained there now except rock and darkness. "Negative." Beside him, Dean swallowed hard. "Did that look like a woman to you?" Tyler glanced at him but said nothing. Back at Firebase Archer, Commander Mason Reed stood over the operations monitor while live drone footage streamed across multiple screens. Operators crowded behind him watching the thermal feed replay repeatedly. Again and again the footage showed hostile movement. Then sudden collapse. Then nothing. Pause it there, Mason ordered. The image froze briefly on the western ridge. Grainy. Distorted by wind interference. But visible enough. A silhouette stood beside the rocks holding what appeared to be a long rifle platform. Slim frame. Narrow shoulders. Calm posture. One Marine leaned closer toward the monitor. That cannot be real. Another operator crossed his arms uneasily. Whoever that is just made shots from over half a mile in mountain crosswinds. Logan Pierce stared silently at the screen beside Mason. She is hunting before they even engage. Mason narrowed his eyes. Something about the figure bothered him less than the posture itself. No panic. No urgency. The shooter stood completely still even after firing impossible long-range corrections through shifting terrain winds. Experienced snipers usually relocated immediately after engagement. This person looked almost relaxed. Then the image flickered once from signal distortion and vanished entirely. Gone again. Mason exhaled slowly through his nose. Track all nearby ridges, he ordered. I want every satellite pass reviewed for the last 48 hours. Already trying, an intelligence officer replied. But thermal distortion keeps wiping clean sections of the terrain. Logan looked toward Mason quietly. You thinking what I am thinking? Mason did not answer immediately. Across the room, another analyst sat quietly near the back operations table reviewing drone overlays beneath dim monitor light. Evelyn Carter. She had not spoken once since Team Delta reported contact. But while everyone else focused on the vanished silhouette, Evelyn studied the wind maps instead. Her pen moved calmly across printed terrain coordinates while operators argued around her. Mason noticed something strange then. She was marking locations before the drone team finished identifying them. Ridge lines. Escape routes. Wind channels. Almost like she already knew where the shooter had moved next. Logan followed Mason's gaze toward her and lowered his voice carefully. You still think she is just an analyst? Mason stared at Evelyn for a long moment as fluorescent light reflected softly against her glasses. Then without looking away, he answered quietly. I think she knows exactly what we are chasing. Rain began falling over Firebase Archer just after midnight, turning the dust roads between the barracks into thin streams of mud beneath the floodlights. Most of the base had gone quiet by then except for the operations building where monitors still glowed against tired faces and half-empty coffee cups. Commander Mason Reed stood near the central table reviewing patrol routes while lightning flashed faintly beyond the mountains in the distance. Nobody talked much anymore when the subject came up. The ghost had stopped feeling like rumor and started feeling real. You are staring at those reports like they insulted your family, Logan Pierce muttered as he dropped into a nearby chair. Mason rubbed one hand across his jaw without looking up. 3 patrols saved in 9 days. He tapped the map sharply. Every engagement happened before our teams recognized the threat. Logan leaned back quietly. You are wondering why somebody helps us without making contact. Mason finally looked at him. No operator stays hidden this long unless they have a reason. Before Logan could answer, the rear door opened softly. Evelyn Carter stepped into the operations room carrying a slim black folder tucked beneath one arm. Her blonde hair was still damp from the rain outside and small drops of water clung to the shoulders of her gray jacket. Most people barely acknowledged her as she crossed the room. She had become background scenery around the base. Quiet analyst. Always carrying maps. Always listening more than speaking. But Mason watched her carefully now. Every movement. Every glance. Evelyn approached the operations table and calmly placed the folder beside him. Updated terrain analysis for tomorrow's patrol routes, she said. Mason opened the folder slowly. Inside were satellite images marked with red lines and handwritten notes in precise lettering. Wind channels. Elevation shifts. Ambush probabilities. Logan frowned immediately. Where did these numbers come from? Evelyn answered without hesitation. Historical movement patterns. Logan flipped through another page. This level of detail usually takes reconnaissance teams days. Not if you understand terrain behavior. Mason remained silent while studying the maps. Something stood out immediately. One patrol route near Sector 12 had been completely crossed out in red ink. Beside it, Evelyn had written only 3 words. Do not enter. Mason looked up slowly. Team Bravo deploys through Sector 12 at 0400. They should not, Evelyn replied calmly. Logan crossed his arms. You got intel we do not know about. No, then why block the route? Evelyn's expression never changed. Because the canyon walls create a funnel effect after sunrise. Anyone moving through there will lose line of sight within 6 minutes. Logan gave a skeptical laugh. That is true for half the valleys out here. Evelyn looked directly at him for the first time. Not like this one. The room grew quieter around them. Rain tapped steadily against the windows while distant thunder rolled across the mountains outside. Mason closed the folder slowly. You seem very certain. I am. Logan leaned forward slightly. Look, no offense, but patrol routes are not decided by analysts reading topographic maps. Evelyn met his stare evenly. Then bury Team Bravo there tomorrow. The sentence landed heavily across the room. No emotion. No raised voice. Just certainty. Several nearby operators looked over immediately. Logan straightened in his chair. Excuse me. Evelyn remained perfectly calm. There are elevated blind channels along the north ridge. Anyone waiting there will see the patrol long before your men identify the threat. Mason studied her face carefully. Most analysts explained probabilities. Evelyn spoke like somebody remembering an event that had already happened. How do you know that terrain so well? Mason asked quietly. Evelyn paused for half a second. I study patterns. Logan shook his head slowly. You keep saying that like it explains everything. She did not respond. Instead she reached into the folder again and slid another map toward Mason. This one showed wind trajectories across the canyon in blue marker. Tiny handwritten calculations covered the margins beside range estimates and elevation corrections. Mason narrowed his eyes. Those were not analyst notes. Those looked like sniper calculations. Professional ones. Logan noticed it too. Wait a second, he muttered. These are ballistic corrections. Evelyn immediately pulled her hand back slightly. Just estimations. Logan looked up sharply. Estimations from who? For the first time since Mason met her, Evelyn hesitated. Barely noticeable. But enough. Then the radio at the operations desk crackled loudly before she could answer. Command, this is Team Bravo Actual. We are requesting final route confirmation for morning deployment. Logan glanced toward Mason. That is them. The room waited. Mason looked down at the crossed-out canyon route again. Then back at Evelyn. Her face remained unreadable beneath the dim fluorescent lights. No fear. No urgency. Just quiet focus. Like she was already watching tomorrow unfold in her mind. Mason finally keyed the radio. Team Bravo, stand by for updated route assignment. Logan looked over immediately. You are changing the route because of her. Mason did not answer at first. His eyes remained fixed on Evelyn Carter. Then quietly he asked, what happens if they ignore your warning? Evelyn lowered her gaze briefly toward the map spread across the table. Rain continued tapping against the windows behind her. Somebody hidden in those mountains, she said softly, is waiting for them to make the wrong choice. The operations room fell silent again. And somewhere beyond the storm outside, buried deep inside miles of black mountain ridges, the unseen sniper remained out there watching every move they made. At 0400 hours, Team Bravo rolled out of Firebase Archer beneath a moonless sky with fresh coordinates loaded into their navigation systems and one problem already hanging over the mission. Half the team knew Commander Mason Reed had changed the original route at the last minute. The other half knew why. Nobody said Evelyn Carter's name out loud, but every operator in the convoy was thinking about her warning. Sergeant Caleb Turner sat inside the lead armored vehicle watching dark mountain ridges slide past through reinforced glass while rainwater streaked across the windshield. "You really trust some analyst over standard recon routes now?" Corporal Hayes muttered from the passenger seat. Caleb kept his eyes forward. "I trust Commander Reed." "That is not what I asked." Caleb did not answer. Truthfully, none of them understood why the route changed. Sector 12 had been the fastest path through the mountains. The revised course forced Team Bravo nearly 6 extra miles west through tighter terrain and narrower roads. But Mason Reed rarely changed plans without reason. Especially not before dawn operations. The convoy continued deeper into the mountain pass while headlights bounced across wet rock walls rising hundreds of feet above them. Every few minutes Caleb glanced toward the upper ridges instinctively. Looking for movement. Looking for signs of the unseen protector people around the base had started whispering about after lights-out conversations. The ghost. Nobody admitted believing the stories openly. But nobody laughed anymore either. "Drone support online," came the voice from command through comms. "Thermal scans show clear movement corridors ahead." Caleb relaxed slightly. "Copy that." Then static crackled briefly across the channel before disappearing again. The convoy rounded another sharp bend as dawn slowly began bleeding pale blue light into the eastern sky. Fog drifted low through the canyon floor, twisting between rocks and dead trees along the slopes. Visibility dropped instantly. "I hate this terrain," Hayes muttered quietly. Caleb agreed. Mountain passes turned dangerous fast when visibility disappeared. Too many blind corners. Too many elevated positions. Too many places for people to disappear. Suddenly the lead vehicle slowed sharply. "What is happening?" someone asked over comms. "Road obstruction," the driver answered. Caleb leaned forward immediately. Ahead of them, several large boulders had collapsed across the narrow pass sometime during the storm. Fresh debris covered the road completely. "That was not on drone scans," Hayes said. Caleb grabbed binoculars and stepped carefully out into the freezing morning air. Wind pushed fog across the canyon while loose gravel crunched beneath his boots. He studied the obstruction carefully. The rocks looked recent. Too recent. Then his stomach tightened. "Everybody spread out," he ordered quietly. "Now." Operators moved quickly toward cover positions beside the canyon walls while Marines scanned the upper ridges through optics. Caleb looked upward instinctively. Thousands of feet of dark rock towers loomed above them through shifting fog. Empty. Silent. Waiting. Then the first warning came through comms. "Movement north ridge." Another voice followed immediately. "Second position east side." Caleb raised binoculars fast. Shapes moved briefly through the fog above them. Multiple elevated positions. Exactly the kind Evelyn warned about. "We need to move," Hayes whispered urgently. Caleb keyed the radio instantly. "Command, possible setup in the canyon." "Repeat, possible elevated overwatch positions." Static answered him. The signal was weakening. Fog thickened around the convoy while the mountains swallowed sound in every direction. Then suddenly one of the distant silhouettes vanished behind the ridge line. Another disappeared seconds later. Caleb froze. Every operator in the canyon noticed it at the same time. Nobody fired from Team Bravo. Yet the elevated movement positions were dropping one by one. "No way," a Marine whispered nearby. Caleb scanned frantically through the fog. Then he heard it. Not a rifle crack. Not an echo. Just the faint metallic sound of a shell casing touching rock somewhere impossibly far away. One operator pointed west suddenly. There. Caleb turned sharply toward the upper cliffs. Through the shifting fog, high above the canyon floor nearly 2,000 yards away, stood the outline of a lone figure beside a narrow ridge shelf. Small frame. Long rifle platform. Motionless against the wind. The figure adjusted position calmly and another hostile silhouette disappeared near the eastern ridge almost instantly afterward. Team Bravo watched in stunned silence. Whoever stood up there was making impossible shots through mountain fog at distances most snipers would never even attempt. "That cannot be human," Hayes muttered under his breath. Caleb kept staring through the binoculars. The figure moved with terrifying calm. No wasted motion. No hesitation. Just smooth precision before stepping slightly sideways behind the ridge. Then gone again. Completely invisible. Visual contact lost, Caleb reported immediately. Unknown shooter West Ridge approximately 1,900 yards. Back at Firebase Archer, Commander Mason Reed stood over the live drone feed while operators scrambled around him adjusting thermal overlays and satellite angles. The image flickered repeatedly from fog interference, but one thing remained clear. Team Bravo had walked directly into the kind of terrain trap Evelyn predicted hours earlier. Logan Pierce looked toward Mason slowly. "If we stayed on the original route," Mason nodded once. He already knew. Half the room stayed focused on the drone footage while another half quietly looked toward the rear operations desk where Evelyn Carter sat alone reviewing updated wind charts beneath monitor light. She did not look surprised by anything unfolding on the screen. In fact, she barely looked up at all. Mason noticed her pen moving calmly across another topographic map while Team Bravo reported enemy positions in real time. Then he realized something that made his pulse slow instantly. Evelyn was marking locations seconds before Team Bravo identified them over comms. Ridge by ridge. Position by position. Like she already knew exactly where every threat would appear before it happened. Logan followed Mason's stare again and lowered his voice carefully. "Tell me you see that too." Mason stared at Evelyn silently while rain hammered against the operations building windows outside. Then quietly, almost to himself, he said, "She has been here the whole time." Commander Mason Reed did not say another word after leaving the operations room. He walked straight through the rain-soaked corridors of Firebase Archer with Logan Pierce close behind him while thunder rolled low across the mountains beyond the perimeter walls. Operators moved around them carrying equipment and supply crates, but Mason barely noticed any of it. His mind kept replaying the same image over and over again. Evelyn Carter calmly marking enemy positions before patrol teams even identified them. "You really think it is her?" Logan finally asked as they entered the intelligence wing. Mason pushed open a steel door without slowing down. "I think nobody predicts mountain firing lanes that accurately without experience." Logan lowered his voice. "A lot of experience." Mason nodded once. They stopped outside the small analysis office Evelyn normally used during operations briefings. The room was dark except for faint monitor glow leaking beneath the doorway. Mason pushed the door open slowly. Empty. The desk inside looked almost untouched. A laptop. Several folded maps. A half-finished cup of black coffee gone cold hours ago. Nothing unusual. Yet the room felt strangely temporary. Like nobody had actually lived there. Logan moved toward the desk while Mason scanned the walls carefully. No personal photos. No military awards. No family pictures. Just terrain maps pinned with colored markers across Afghanistan's eastern mountain ranges. Logan opened a desk drawer and frowned immediately. "You need to see this." Mason stepped over. Inside lay a stack of range cards covered in handwritten ballistic calculations. Elevation adjustments. Wind drift corrections. Long-range trajectory notes extending beyond 2,000 yards. Mason stared at the pages silently. These were not classroom calculations. These were field notes. Logan picked up one of the cards carefully. These are sniper formulas. Mason looked closer at the handwriting. Precise. Clean. Efficient. Then something else caught his eye. A notation in the corner of one page. Ridge Echo. Distance, 1,947 yards. The exact engagement distance Team Bravo reported less than 2 hours earlier. Logan slowly looked up. That is impossible. Mason's pulse slowed. Suddenly every strange detail surrounding Evelyn Carter started aligning perfectly in his head. The scars on her hands. The terrain predictions. The calm voice over comms. The way she moved through the base unnoticed while somehow understanding every patrol route better than the operators themselves. Logan stepped toward another filing cabinet and tried the handle. Locked. Maybe she is former recon, he muttered uncertainly. Mason shook his head once. Former recon does not make shots through fog at nearly 2,000 yards. Thunder shook the windows softly. Then Mason noticed something mounted beside the rear wall map. A single military patch. Black fabric. No rank. No unit identifier. Just a faded silver symbol stitched into the center. A ghost shape inside crosshairs. Mason's expression hardened instantly. He recognized it. Years ago during joint operations briefings, whispers circulated through special operations circles about a classified Overwatch unit used only during impossible terrain warfare. Operators called them Phantom Division unofficially because official records barely existed. Their sniper teams operated alone for months at a time with no direct command attachments. Most people believed the unit had been shut down years earlier after several missions disappeared into classified archives. Logan stared at the patch too. You know what that is? Mason answered quietly. I hoped I did not. Suddenly footsteps approached outside the office. Both men turned immediately as an older intelligence officer appeared in the doorway carrying folders under one arm. The man froze upon seeing them inside Evelyn's office. Commander Reed. Mason stepped forward instantly. Who is Evelyn Carter? The officer's face changed almost imperceptibly. Not surprise. Recognition. Then caution. You should not be in here. Mason ignored the statement completely. Who is she? The officer hesitated before setting the folders down carefully. Rain hammered against the windows outside while the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Finally the man sighed quietly. Officially, she is civilian intelligence support attached through temporary Pentagon assignment. Logan folded his arms. And unofficially? The officer looked toward the ghost patch mounted on the wall. About 7 years ago there was a sniper attached to Joint Special Operations Command operating in eastern Afghanistan. Mason stayed silent. The officer continued carefully. No confirmed photographs. No public records. No formal commendations. Just mission reports. Logan frowned. What kind of reports? The officer looked directly at Mason now. The kind that only appear when entire teams survive situations they should not survive. Silence filled the office. Mason's jaw tightened slightly. Name. The officer hesitated again. Most operators never knew it. Tell me anyway. The man glanced once more toward the patch before speaking quietly. Ghost 1. Logan let out a breath slowly beneath his nose. Mason stared toward Evelyn's empty desk. Suddenly everything made terrifying sense. The hidden Overwatch. The impossible shooting angles. The calm voice. The complete invisibility. She was never an analyst. She had been protecting them from the shadows the entire time. Where is she now? Mason asked immediately. The officer looked uneasy for the first time. She disappeared from official operations nearly 3 years ago after a classified mission in Helmand province. Logan frowned. Then why is she here? Before the officer could answer, alarms suddenly echoed through the operations building outside. Radios burst alive across the hallway with overlapping voices. Emergency transmission from Team Echo. Possible hostile movement near Black Ridge. Thermal signatures multiplying. Mason grabbed the radio from his vest instantly. Command, this is Reed. Status. Static crackled loudly before a panicked voice answered. Team Echo is pinned near the Ridge Pass. Drone visibility collapsing in the storm. Mason and Logan exchanged looks instantly. Black Ridge. One of the deadliest elevated corridors in the region. Then another transmission broke through the static. Calm. Female. Move Team Echo 30 yards east immediately. Mason froze where he stood. The voice continued. The western ridge is compromised. Logan looked toward him slowly. Same voice. Same impossible calm. Mason keyed the radio without hesitation. Evelyn. Silence answered him for one long second. Then finally the woman on comm spoke again. Commander Reed, she said quietly. You should not have opened my office. The storm over Black Ridge intensified fast, swallowing the mountains beneath sheets of rain and thick rolling fog that erased visibility beyond 50 yards. Inside the operations center at Firebase Archer, overlapping radio chatter filled the room while thermal drone feeds flickered across the monitors in broken fragments. Team Echo had lost clear satellite connection nearly 4 minutes earlier. Commander Mason Reed gripped the radio tighter against his vest as Evelyn Carter's calm voice faded briefly through the static. Repeat your position, Mason ordered immediately. Silence answered him. Then another burst of interference crackled across the channel before her voice returned. Steady. Controlled. Move Team Echo east now. Operators around the room exchanged tense glances. One Marine shook his head slowly. How is she seeing anything through this weather? Nobody answered. Mason stepped closer to the operations screen where distorted thermal images painted the ridge lines in unstable flashes of white and gray. Somewhere inside that storm, Team Echo was trapped in elevated terrain with hostile movement closing around them. Yet Evelyn sounded almost unaffected by the chaos. Commander, Logan Pierce said quietly beside him, listen to her breathing. Mason noticed it immediately. Nothing. No panic. No strain. Just calm speech beneath hurricane-force mountain winds. She is out there, Mason said under his breath. Logan looked at him sharply. You think she is physically near Team Echo? Mason already knew the answer. She has to be. Suddenly Team Echo's radio burst alive again. Movement north side, a Marine shouted through static. We cannot see through the fog. Another voice followed immediately afterward. Wait, targets are dropping. Silence spread through the operations room. Mason looked toward the monitor. Faint thermal signatures disappeared one by one along the ridge lines surrounding Team Echo's position. Fast. Precise. Controlled. No visible firing point. No flash signature. Just the storm swallowing shapes into darkness. Logan stared at the screen in disbelief. Nobody shoots through weather like this. Then another transmission came through. Calm female voice. Fall back 20 yards and stay below the ridge break. Team Echo obeyed instantly now. Nobody questioned her anymore. Mason keyed his radio again. Evelyn, where are you? A pause followed. Rain hammered against the base windows while the storm shook the satellite feed across the screens. Finally her voice returned quieter this time. Close enough. Mason's jaw tightened. You have been protecting patrol teams this entire deployment. No answer. How long? Another long pause. Then softly she replied, long enough to know which names deserved to make it home. The room fell silent again. Operators stopped pretending they were listening casually now. Every person in the operations center understood what was happening. The ghost was real. And she had been sitting inside this base beside them for weeks carrying maps while secretly keeping patrol teams alive from the mountains above. Logan looked toward Mason slowly. She was eating breakfast 10 feet from us. Mason remembered it instantly. Evelyn sitting quietly in the mess hall with coffee and terrain reports while operators joked nearby without noticing her at all. The quiet analyst nobody remembered seeing arrive and nobody questioned when she stayed late after briefings. The woman who always sat near exits. Always studied wind patterns. Always looked toward the mountains instead of the people talking around her. Suddenly another operator called out from the monitor station. Commander, thermal contact West Ridge. Mason turned immediately. The drone feed sharpened briefly through the storm interference and for the first time the figure appeared clearly enough to identify. High above Team Echo's position, standing against the rain beside a narrow cliff edge nearly 2,000 yards away, was Evelyn Carter. Long rifle platform braced against the rocks. Blonde hair pulled back beneath a soaked hood. Motionless except for the slight movement of the rifle adjusting into position. Nobody in the room spoke. Even through the distorted drone feed, her calm presence felt unreal. Team Echo's radio erupted again. How is she making those shots in this weather? Another Marine asked breathlessly. No one answered him because nobody inside the operations room understood it either. Mason stared silently at the screen. Years of combat experience told him what he was seeing should not have been possible. Wind shear. Rain interference. Fog distortion. Mountain drift. Everything about those conditions should have made accurate long-range fire impossible. Yet Evelyn moved with complete confidence like the storm itself was part of the calculation. Then the drone zoomed closer automatically for one brief second. Enough for everyone in the room to notice the rifle. Suppressed platform. Long barrel. Folded stock. Custom optics setup unlike standard military issue. Logan exhaled slowly beneath his breath. That is not army equipment. Mason recognized it too. Modified multi-role adaptive rifle platform. Expensive. Specialized. Built for extreme range operations. The kind of weapon almost nobody in the military ever touched unless their missions officially did not exist. Suddenly the drone feed glitched violently from lightning interference. The image distorted across the monitors before stabilizing again seconds later. Evelyn was gone. Empty ridge. Empty rocks. Nothing remained there except rain and darkness. One Marine whispered quietly from the back of the room, "How does she disappear like that?" Mason never answered him. Because deep down he already understood. Evelyn Carter survived this long by never existing in one place long enough to be found. The radio crackled one final time. "Team Echo is clear," she said calmly. "You can bring them home now." Mason stepped closer to the radio. "Evelyn." Silence. "Come back to base." Another pause followed while storm winds roared faintly through the transmission. Then finally her voice returned softer than before. "That was never the mission, Commander." The channel went dead immediately afterward. Around the operations room, nobody moved for several long seconds. Operators simply stared at the empty drone feed still showing rain sweeping across Black Ridge. Mason looked toward Evelyn's abandoned desk near the rear wall. Map still spread open beneath dim monitor light. Coffee untouched. Notes unfinished. Like she had stepped away only moments ago. But now everyone finally understood the truth. The ghost sniper they spent weeks chasing had never been hiding from them at all. She had been standing quietly beside them the entire time. 3 days later, the storm clouds finally cleared above Firebase Archer, revealing sharp blue skies stretched across the endless Afghan mountains beyond the perimeter walls. The base felt different now. Quieter. More alert. Operators who once laughed during briefings now studied ridgelines longer through binoculars before deployments. Marines stopped mocking the stories about the ghost. Because they had all seen the footage. They had all heard her voice. And none of them could explain how Evelyn Carter had protected entire patrol teams without anyone realizing she was there. Commander Mason Reed stood alone near the outer watchtower early that morning, coffee warming his hands against the cold mountain wind. Below him, supply trucks rolled slowly through the compound while helicopters lifted dust into the air near the runway. Life at the base continued forward like always. Missions. Reports. Rotations. But something invisible had shifted among the men stationed there. Respect. Not the loud kind earned through medals or speeches. The quieter kind. The kind soldiers carried when they knew someone had stood between them and danger without ever asking for recognition afterward. Logan Pierce climbed the tower steps carrying a folded file beneath one arm. "You were right," he said as he reached the top. Mason glanced over. "About what?" Logan handed him the file. "She is gone." Mason opened it silently. Inside sat a single transfer report stamped with heavy black redactions covering nearly every line. No departure time. No destination. No official signature. Just one sentence left uncovered near the bottom of the page. Temporary attachment terminated. Logan leaned against the railing beside him. Nobody saw her leave. Mason almost smiled faintly at that. That sounds about right. Wind swept across the tower while both men looked out toward the mountains where the morning sun lit the ridges in pale gold. Somewhere beyond those peaks, Evelyn Carter had vanished back into the same shadows she spent weeks operating from. Logan exhaled slowly. "You know what bothers me?" Mason looked at him. "The whole time she was here," Logan shook his head. "She looked completely ordinary." Mason remembered it all now with uncomfortable clarity. Evelyn sitting quietly in the mess hall while operators argued nearby. Evelyn carrying maps through hallways nobody noticed her walking through. Evelyn drinking cold coffee during briefings while secretly calculating firing lanes that saved lives hours later. Every moment suddenly felt different in hindsight. "That was the point," Mason said quietly. Down below, several younger Marines crossed the yard laughing about something while heading toward the armory. One of them glanced toward the mountains uneasily before entering the building. Even now, people still looked toward those ridges differently after sunset. Like they expected somebody to be watching from up there. Maybe they were right. Logan nodded toward the file in Mason's hand. "There is one more thing." Mason opened the final page carefully. A classified photograph had been partially attached beneath the paperwork. Grainy. Old. Taken years earlier somewhere in the mountains. A younger Evelyn Carter stood beside a rocky ridge line wearing weathered tactical gear with a long rifle slung across her shoulder. Her expression remained exactly the same as Mason remembered from the base. Calm. Focused. Distant. Written beneath the photo in faded black ink were 4 words. Long-range Overwatch Specialist. Logan whistled softly beneath his breath. That does not exactly explain much. Mason kept staring at the picture. It explains enough. Footsteps echoed up the tower stairs suddenly as Sergeant Caleb Turner appeared carrying fresh patrol reports. He stopped awkwardly upon seeing them. "Sorry, sir." Mason folded the file closed. "What is it?" Caleb hesitated briefly. "New recruits arrived this morning." Logan smirked slightly. "Already causing trouble?" Caleb gave a tired laugh. One of them heard the stories about the ghost sniper. Mason raised an eyebrow slightly. And? Caleb glanced back toward the mountains instinctively before answering. He asked if she was real. Silence drifted across the tower for a moment while wind moved through the fencing around the perimeter below. Mason looked again toward the endless ridges stretching far beyond Firebase Archer. Empty mountains. Silent cliffs. Places where a person could disappear forever if they understood the terrain well enough. Finally he spoke quietly. You have probably already walked past her. Caleb frowned slightly, not fully understanding the answer, before nodding and heading back down the stairs. Logan watched him leave before shaking his head slowly. You think she will come back? Mason stared toward the distant horizon. Somewhere out there, hidden beyond miles of stone and shadow, a woman